The Potter by the Nile. It is the year 1300 before Christ. The new kingdom of Egypt. The reign of the great Pharaoh Rameses II. The Nile River flows through the land like a vein of life. Every year, without fail, it rises and floods the fields, leaving behind a layer of rich black silt in which anything will grow. The Egyptians call it simply the river. They do not have a word for the Nile. There is only one river that matters. On the west bank of the river, across from the great city of Thebes, lies a small village of craftsmen. This is Deir el-Medina, the place of truth. The men who live here are the artists and artisans who work on the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. They are the finest craftsmen in Egypt, sculptors, painters, goldsmiths. And among them lives a potter named Ka. Ka is not famous. His name will not be written in the great temples or carved on the walls of royal tombs. He is an ordinary man, doing ordinary work. But his work is essential. Every household needs pots, for storing grain, for carrying water, for cooking food, for holding the beer that every Egyptian drinks daily. Without potters, civilization itself would crack and crumble. Ka rises before dawn. His workshop is a simple courtyard behind his house, open to the sky. Against one wall stands his potter's wheel, a simple disc of wood that spins on a stone pivot. It is a humble tool, but in the hands of a master, it can create vessels of perfect symmetry and grace. The clay comes from the river bank, where Ka digs it himself. It is Nile silt, dark, smooth, almost black when wet. He soaks it in water, kneads it with his feet to remove the air bubbles, then wedges it with his hands until it is perfectly smooth and uniform. Bad clay makes bad pots. Ka has been doing this for 30 years. His hands know the clay better than his eyes. The sun rises over the eastern hills as Ka begins to work. He sits at his wheel, a lump of clay before him. He dips his hands in water and sets the wheel spinning with a push of his foot. His thumbs press into the center of the clay. His fingers shape the walls. The vessel rises, as if by magic, from the spinning disc. It is a beautiful thing to watch. The clay seems alive, responding to the slightest pressure of his fingers, growing taller and thinner with each pass of his hands. A potter's wheel is a simple machine, but in the right hands it can create objects of extraordinary beauty. Ka's hands are those hands. He makes storage jars today, large, practical vessels with wide mouths and thick walls, designed to hold grain through the long dry season. Each one takes perhaps 10 minutes. By mid-morning, a dozen pots stand drying in the shade. The heat grows as the sun climbs higher. The temperature reaches over 40 degrees. Ka works in the shade of a palm frond awning, but still the sweat pours from his body. He drinks water from a clay cup, one of his own, made years ago, the rim worn smooth by his lips. The sun in Egypt is not like the sun anywhere else. It is relentless, pitiless, a god made of fire. The Egyptians worship the sun as Ra, the greatest of the gods, who sails across the sky in his golden boat each day and descends into the underworld each night to battle the serpent of chaos. When the sun shines, Ra is watching. When the sun burns, Ra is judging. Ka does not think much about the gods while he works. He is a practical man. But he makes the small gestures of respect that all Egyptians make, a nod toward the east at sunrise, a whispered prayer before he eats. The gods are everywhere in Egypt. They are in the river, in the sun, in the soil, in the clay that Ka shapes with his hands. At midday, his wife Nebat brings him bread and beer. She is a weaver, her hands as skilled with flax as his are with clay. They have been married for 20 years. They have buried 2 children and raised 3. This is the way of the world, in Egypt as everywhere. Life is fragile. The river gives, and the river takes away. After the noon meal, Ka turns to his finer work. He makes a set of small cosmetic jars for a noblewoman in Thebes. These are delicate things, no larger than his palm, with narrow necks and flared rims. They will hold kohl, the black eye paint that Egyptian women wear, or the fragrant oils with which they anoint their bodies. Ka decorates them with simple patterns: a zigzag line, a row of dots, a stylized lotus flower. The lotus is the flower of rebirth, of the sun, of the daily resurrection that gives meaning to Egyptian life. When the pots are dry, Ka loads them into his kiln. The kiln is a simple dome of mud brick, fired by charcoal. He stacks the pots carefully, leaving space for the heat to circulate. Then he seals the door with clay and lights the fire. The firing will take all night. Ka will stay awake, feeding the fire, watching the glow of the kiln against the dark sky. It is a vigil, a ritual, a form of prayer. If the fire is too hot, the pots will crack. If it is too cool, they will be weak. Ka has been doing this for 30 years. He rarely loses a pot. As the sun sets over the western hills, Ka sits by his kiln and watches the stars come out. The air cools. The river flows, silent and eternal. The bats flutter from their caves. The jackals call to each other across the desert. Ka is a potter. He makes vessels of clay that will hold grain and water and oil and wine. His work will not last forever. Pots break. Clay returns to the earth from which it came. But some of Ka's pots will survive. Some of them will be buried in tombs, placed beside the dead to hold the provisions they will need in the afterlife. Some of them will be found by archaeologists 3,000 years later, still bearing the fingerprints of the man who made them. The Egyptians believed that as long as a person's name was remembered, they lived on. Ka's name was written on a small limestone tablet, buried in his tomb, where it lay for 3,000 years until the archaeologists found it. Now, in a museum in Turin, you can see his name, and you can see his pots, and you can see the fingerprints he left in the clay, the marks of a man who lived and worked and loved on the banks of the Nile 13 centuries before Christ. The fire burns. The stars turn. The river flows. And somewhere in the darkness, the potter keeps his vigil, as potters have done since the first clay was shaped by human hands, as they will do until the last fire is extinguished and the last wheel stops turning. The Egyptians believed that life continued after death, and that the dead needed the same things as the living: food and drink, clothing and tools, pots and pans. That is why the tombs were filled with grave goods. That is why Ka's pots were placed beside the dead. The work of a potter was not just practical. It was sacred. The vessels he made would accompany someone into eternity. The tradition of pottery in Egypt is older than the pyramids, older than the pharaohs, older than writing itself. For thousands of years, the potters of the Nile have shaped clay into vessels that hold life itself, the grain that feeds the living, the water that quenches their thirst, the beer that gladdens their hearts, and finally the grave goods that equip the dead for the journey to the afterlife. Ka is part of a chain that stretches back to the dawn of civilization and forward into an unimaginable future. He does not think about this. He does not think of himself as the heir of an ancient tradition. He thinks about the clay. He thinks about the wheel. He thinks about the fire. And in the darkness, the potter keeps his vigil. The fire burns. The stars turn. The river flows. And somewhere, in a museum in Turin, the pots that Ka made still hold the fingerprints of the man who shaped them 3,000 years ago. His body is gone. His name was forgotten for millennia. But his hands are still here, pressed into the clay, reaching across 3,000 years to touch our world. That is the immortality of the craftsman. That is the eternity of the potter by the Nile.